The gunshot cracked through the crisp October air just as Beatrice Warren ducked behind the feed store, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Tucson, Arizona Territory, 1883, was no place for a woman alone with empty pockets and an emptier stomach. 3 days without food had made her desperate enough to risk stealing from the general store's back storeroom, a decision that now had her fleeing through the dusty alleyways of White Pine, with nothing but a single loaf of bread clutched to her chest. The bread wasn't worth dying for, but starvation had clouded her judgment. She hadn't expected the shopkeeper to return so quickly, nor for him to have such keen eyes and a ready revolver. The bullet had missed her by inches, splintering the wooden door frame as she'd bolted into the street. Beatrice paused to catch her breath, pressing her back against the rough wooden planks of the feed store. Her once fine dress, the last remnant of her former life in Boston, was now tattered and stained with the red dust of Arizona Territory. She listened intently, hearing the shopkeeper's angry shouts fading as he gave up the chase. With trembling hands, she broke off a piece of bread and shoved it into her mouth, barely taking time to chew before swallowing. The simple sustenance nearly brought tears to her eyes. Just as she was about to take another bite, a shadow fell across her. "That's quite a way to get your supper, madam," came a low, measured voice. Beatrice froze, her gaze traveling up slowly. The man towering over her wore trail-worn boots, dusty denim pants, and a faded blue shirt under a leather vest. A Colt revolver rested in a well-used holster at his hip. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see his eyes bright, assessing, and remarkably free of judgment. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," she whispered, clutching the bread closer, ready to run again if necessary. "Would you rather I starved?" The man studied her for a long moment, then removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His expression softened. "Name's Finn Donovan," he said, crouching down to her eye level. "And no, I wouldn't rather you starved. But there are better ways to get food than stealing and getting shot at." Beatrice swallowed hard. "I tried working. No one's hiring women except the saloon, and I won't." She stopped, lifting her chin defiantly. Finn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The ranch I work for needs a cook. Owner's wife just had twins and she can't manage the ranch hands' meals anymore." He stood and extended his hand. "Take what you need from that bread and my heart as well if you'll have it someday. For now, I'm offering honest work." Beatrice stared at his outstretched hand, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I know hunger when I see it," he replied simply. "And I know someone running from something, been there myself." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, Jake's cooking is fixing to kill us all, and I'd rather not die of bad biscuits." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a small laugh escape her. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. "I'm Beatrice," she said finally, accepting his hand. "Beatrice Warren." His grip was warm and strong as he helped her to her feet. "Well, Miss Warren, let's get you something proper to eat before we head to the ranch. Then you can tell me what brings a Boston lady to White Pine, Arizona." Her eyes widened. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" Finn smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "Your accent gives you away. Plus, no Arizona woman would try stealing bread in broad daylight. They'd wait till dark." For the first time in months, Beatrice felt something beyond hunger and fear, a flicker of something that might have been hope. Finn led her to a small cafe on the edge of town, away from the general store where she'd nearly gotten herself shot. The proprietress, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Sullivan, Didn't question why Finn was bringing in a dusty, half-starved woman. She simply set down plates of stew, cornbread, and coffee without comment. "Eat slowly," Finn advised as Beatrice picked up her spoon with a shaking hand. "Your stomach won't take kindly to too much too fast." She nodded, forcing herself to take small bites even as her body screamed for her to devour everything in sight. After a few spoonfuls, she felt her head clearing. "The Broken Spur is about 12 miles outside of town," Finn explained, breaking his cornbread into pieces. "Owner's name is Thomas Blackwell. Good man, fair employer. His wife Sarah just had twin boys last month and the ranch hands have been fending for themselves since." He grimaced. "We're better at handling cattle than cook stoves. And you think he'll hire me, just like that?" Beatrice couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. "He will when I tell him you're my cousin, come west after losing your husband," Finn said matter-of-factly. "Unless you'd rather tell him the truth about why you're here." Beatrice stared into her stew. "No," she whispered. "I'd rather not." Finn nodded. "Your business is your own, Miss Warren. All I need to know is if you can cook." At this, Beatrice smiled faintly. "I can cook well enough. I worked as a governess for a wealthy family in Boston. The cook there taught me quite a bit, though I suspect ranch fare is somewhat different from Beacon Hill dinners. The boys will be grateful for anything that doesn't taste like Jake's boot leather biscuits," Finn assured her. They finished their meal in companionable silence. When it was time to pay, Finn placed coins on the table before Beatrice could even think about the empty purse hidden in the folds of her dress. Outside, Finn led her to the livery stable where his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, waited patiently. "We'll need to get you a mount," he said, looking her over. "Can you ride?" Beatrice nodded. "I learned as a girl." An hour later they were heading out of White Pine. Beatrice perched somewhat uncomfortably on a gentle mare Finn had arranged to borrow from a friend. Her stomach was full, and she carried a small bundle of supplies, basic necessities Finn had purchased without fanfare or expectation of repayment. As they rode, the town giving way to open range and distant mountains, Beatrice studied her unexpected benefactor from the corner of her eye. Finn Donovan rode easily in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't press her for the story she was clearly hiding, and for that she was grateful. "How long have you worked at the Broken Spur?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence between them. "Going on 4 years now," he replied. "Drifted in from Colorado after." He paused, then simply said, "After the war." The way he said it told Beatrice he meant the war between the states, though he didn't look old enough to have fought in it. She didn't press. Everyone out here seemed to have pieces of their past they preferred to leave unexamined. "The ranch is good land," Finn continued after a moment. "Blackwell runs about 2,000 head of cattle. There's 8 of us hands plus the foreman, Cal Jenkins. Good men, most of them." His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Rough around the edges, but they'll mind their manners around you." The terrain grew more rugged as they rode, saguaro cacti and mesquite giving way to rocky outcroppings and scrub pine. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail, and Beatrice found herself relaxing into the rhythm of her horse's gait, the tension of the day's events gradually easing from her shoulders. "We should reach the ranch by sunset," Finn said, glancing at the western horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "Mrs. Blackwell will get you settled tonight, and you can start your duties tomorrow." Beatrice nodded, a flutter of anxiety returning. What if the Blackwells didn't want her after all? What if they saw through Finn's story? "What if they're good people?" Finn said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "They won't turn you away." Before Beatrice could respond, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Finn's hand moved instinctively toward his holster as 3 mounted men appeared around a bend in the trail ahead. "Donovan," called the lead rider, a burly man with a thick mustache. "Thought you'd be back hours ago." Finn relaxed visibly. "Had business in town, Cal," he replied, nodding toward the foreman of the Broken Spur. His eyes flicked briefly to the other 2 men, both younger and rougher looking than Cal Jenkins. Cal's gaze shifted to Beatrice, eyebrows rising in undisguised surprise. "And what sort of business might that be?" "This is my cousin, Miss Beatrice Warren," Finn said smoothly before Beatrice could speak. "She's come west from Boston. I've offered her the cook's position at the ranch, with Blackwell's approval, of course." Cal studied Beatrice with frank assessment, taking in her travel-worn appearance. To his credit, his expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Well, Miss Warren, you're a sight for sore eyes, even trail dusty," he said finally. "The boys have been surviving on biscuits hard enough to use as horseshoes since Mrs. Blackwell took to her confinement." He tipped his hat. "Cal Jenkins, foreman of the Broken Spur." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Jenkins," Beatrice replied, summoning the proper Boston manners that had been drilled into her since childhood. Cal gestured to the 2 men behind him. "This here's Eddie Miller and Pete Wilson. We were headed to check the north pasture fence line." His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked back at Finn. "Any trouble in town I should know about?" Finn shook his head. "Nothing worth mentioning. We should get to the ranch before dark, get Miss Warren settled." Cal nodded, though Beatrice thought she detected a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "We'll see you back at the ranch for supper then," he said, touching his hat brim before moving past them, his companions following silently behind. Once they were out of earshot, Beatrice turned to Finn. "Your cousin?" she asked quietly. "Easiest explanation," he replied with a shrug, "though we'll need to get our story straight before we reach the ranch. Cal's no fool, he knows I don't have family." Beatrice bit her lip. "I don't want to cause trouble for you, Mr. Donovan." "Finn," he corrected gently. "And you're not causing trouble. Just stick close to the truth where you can. Lies are easier to remember that way." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, they crested a rise and Beatrice caught her first glimpse of the Broken Spur. The main house was larger than she'd expected, built of sturdy logs with a broad porch wrapping around 2 sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a barn, bunkhouse, smithy, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. Corrals and pens extended from the barn, and beyond them the open range stretched away toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Beatrice murmured, momentarily forgetting her anxiety. Finn smiled a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "It is at that," he agreed. "Feels more like home than anywhere else I've been." As they approached the ranch yard, a tall man emerged from the main house, shading his eyes against the setting sun. Thomas Blackwell was younger than Beatrice had expected, perhaps 35, with the lean, hardened look of a man who worked alongside his hands. "Donovan," he called. "Jenkins rode ahead, said you'd brought a surprise from town." Finn dismounted smoothly and moved to help Beatrice down from her mare. She accepted his assistance, acutely aware of his strong hands at her waist and the momentary closeness as her feet touched the ground. "Mr. Blackwell," Finn said, stepping back. "This is Miss Beatrice Warren." "My cousin," he added, the slight hesitation barely noticeable. "She's come west from Boston and is looking for work. I thought she might fill the cooking position, what with Mrs. Blackwell busy with the twins." Thomas Blackwell studied Beatrice with keen eyes. "You're Finn's cousin?" he asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Before Finn could respond, Beatrice stepped forward, summoning every ounce of composure she possessed. "My mother was his father's sister," she said, the lie coming more easily than she'd expected. "We corresponded after I was widowed last year. When my circumstances in Boston became difficult, Finn suggested I might find a fresh start out west." Something in her expression must have convinced Blackwell, for his face softened. "Well, Miss Warren, anyone related to Finn is welcome at the Broken Spur. And Lord knows we need someone who can cook. The men are about ready to mutiny over Jake's attempts at flapjacks." Relief flooded through Beatrice. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I promise I won't disappoint you." "Thomas, please," he said, gesturing toward the house. "Come inside and meet my wife. She'll be delighted to have another woman around the place." As they followed Thomas toward the main house, Finn leaned close to Beatrice. "Well done," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I think we might just pull this off." Sarah Blackwell proved to be a pretty young woman with tired eyes and a genuine smile. She welcomed Beatrice warmly, her relief at the prospect of having a cook for the ranch hands obvious. The twins, barely a month old, slept in a cradle near the fire, their tiny faces peaceful in slumber. "You'll stay here in the main house tonight," Sarah insisted, showing Beatrice to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. "Tomorrow, if you're agreeable, we can move your things to the small cabin behind the cookhouse. It's where the previous cook lived, nothing fancy, but it's private and has its own stove." Beatrice blinked back unexpected tears at the kindness. "That would be perfect, Mrs. Blackwell. Thank you." "Sarah, please," the younger woman said, patting Beatrice's hand. "Now, I've had a bath brought in for you, and there's a clean nightdress on the bed. You must be exhausted after your journey." After Sarah left, closing the door behind her, Beatrice stood motionless in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her fortunes had taken. That morning she'd been starving, desperate enough to steal, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Now she had shelter, the promise of honest work, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who'd offered her not just bread, but dignity. The thought of Finn Donovan brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the steaming bath awaiting her. His words in the alleyway echoed in her mind. "Take what you need from that bread, and my heart as well, if you'll have it someday." Had he meant it? Or was it merely a figure of speech, a bit of cowboy gallantry offered to a woman in distress? As Beatrice sank into the bath, letting the warm water soothe her trail, weary body, she pushed the questions aside. For now, it was enough to be safe, to be warm, to have food in her stomach and the prospect of honest work ahead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, not least of which would be cooking for a bunkhouse full of hungry cowboys. Whatever else Finn Donovan might have offered her, that was a concern for another day. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Broken Spur, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. Beatrice, accustomed to rising early from her years as a governess, was already awake and dressed in the clothes Sarah had provided, a simple blue calico dress, slightly too large but clean and whole. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the aroma of coffee when Sarah entered, one of the twins cradled against her shoulder. "You're up early," she observed, smiling tiredly. "Joshua here decided sunrise was the perfect time for breakfast." "May I?" Beatrice asked, holding out her arms. When Sarah hesitated, Beatrice added, "I was governess to 3 children in Boston. I'm quite experienced with babies." Sarah relinquished her son with visible relief. "His brother Jacob is still asleep, thank goodness. If you could hold Joshua while I fix his bottle." As Beatrice cradled the infant, swaying gently and murmuring soothing nonsense, she felt a pang of longing so acute it nearly took her breath away. This a home, a family, children of her own, had once seemed an attainable dream. Now, "You're a natural," Sarah commented, returning with the bottle. Do you have children of your own? Beatrice shook her head, keeping her eyes on Joshua's tiny face as he eagerly took the bottle. No, I was not blessed with children during my marriage. The truth of this, at least, was easy to speak. Sarah's expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry. May I ask about your husband? Beatrice had prepared for this question, knowing it would come. His name was William, she said, the fictional name coming easily to her lips. He was a clerk in a shipping office. Influenza took him last winter. She forced herself to meet Sarah's sympathetic gaze. Afterward, there wasn't much to keep me in Boston. It was close enough to truth that she didn't stumble over the words. There had indeed been a William in her life, though he hadn't been her husband, and he hadn't died of influenza. The rest the lack of reasons to stay in Boston that was entirely true. Well, I'm glad you found your way to us, Sarah said, taking Joshua back once he'd finished his bottle. The men will be coming in for breakfast soon. I'd help, but please, Beatrice interrupted gently. You have your hands full with these little ones. That's why I'm here. Just point me to the cookhouse and tell me what the men usually have for breakfast. The cookhouse proved to be a solidly built structure with a large cast iron stove, a long preparation table, and 2 dining tables with benches that could seat the entire complement of ranch hands. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, and preserves. A root cellar access through a trapdoor in the floor held potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. Beatrice tied on the clean apron Sarah had provided and set to work. By the time the ranch hands began filing in, she had coffee brewing, sourdough biscuits baking, and a skillet of fried potatoes and salt pork sizzling on the stove. The men entered warily, eyeing her with varying degrees of curiosity and surprise. Cal Jenkins arrived first, removing his hat as he stepped through the doorway. "Morning, Miss Warren," he said, sniffing appreciatively. "Something smells a sight better than Jake's usual offerings." Beatrice smiled, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Help yourself, Mr. Jenkins. Breakfast will be ready shortly." The other men followed suit, introducing themselves politely as they filled tin cups with steaming coffee. Jake, a grizzled older man with a perpetual squint, seemed particularly relieved to see her. "Never claimed to be no cook," he mumbled, accepting a biscuit hot from the oven. "Was just filling in till the boss found someone proper." Finn was the last to enter, his hair damp from washing, his expression warming when he saw Beatrice bustling about the cookhouse. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Beatrice felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. "Morning, cousin," he said, the slight emphasis on the last word a reminder of their agreed-upon story. "Good morning, Finn," she replied, sliding a plate of biscuits onto the table. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," he answered, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary. "Knowing you were safe." The simple statement, delivered quietly enough that only she could hear, sent a rush of warmth to Beatrice's cheeks. She turned quickly back to the stove, aware of the curious glances from the other men. Breakfast passed in a buzz of conversation and the clatter of utensils against tin plates. The Cowboys devoured everything Beatrice put before them, offering compliments that ranged from Pete Wilson's shy, "Best biscuits I ever ate, madam," to Eddie Miller's more exuberant, "Lord have mercy. I think I just died and went to heaven." When the meal was finished, the men filed out to begin their day's work. Finn lingered, helping Beatrice gather the dirty dishes. "You don't have to do that," she protested when he began pumping water into the washing basin. "My ma raised me better than to leave a lady to clean up after me," he replied, rolling up his sleeves. "Besides, gives me a chance to ask how you're settling in." Beatrice looked around the cookhouse, now empty except for the two of them. "Everyone's been kind," she said softly. "Kinder than I deserve, given the lie we're telling." Finn's expression grew serious. "Sometimes a fresh start needs a little fiction to take root." He hesitated, then asked the question she'd been dreading. "You want to tell me what really brought you to White Pine, Beatrice?" She stilled, her hands deep in soapy water. For a moment, she considered spinning another tale, something closer to the fiction she'd told Sarah. But something in Finn's steady gaze made her want to offer him at least a portion of the truth. "I was engaged," she said finally, her voice low. "To a man my father's business partner selected. William Harrington was his name. He was." She swallowed hard. "He wasn't a kind man, though he showed that side only to me, never to my father or anyone else." Finn's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "After my father died last spring, I learned the family business was in ruins. There were debts I knew nothing about. William offered a solution. He would assume the debts if I agreed to move up our wedding date." Beatrice's hands trembled, sending ripples across the dishwater. "2 days before the wedding, I discovered his true plans. He'd arranged for all my father's assets to be transferred to him upon our marriage, including a parcel of land that contained—" She stopped abruptly. "Contained what?" Finn prompted gently. Beatrice shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that I realized William never cared for me. The engagement, the offer to settle my father's debts, it was all part of his scheme." Her voice steadied as she continued. "I confronted him. He became violent. I managed to escape, but I knew I couldn't stay in Boston. He's a powerful man with connections everywhere. So I took what little money I had left and headed west, thinking I could lose myself where no one knew me." Finn was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he asked, "This William, would he come looking for you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "The land he wanted is worthless without certain information only I possess, but his pride was wounded when I fled. Men like William Harrington don't forgive such insults easily." Finn nodded slowly. "Well, White Pine's about as far from Boston society as you can get. And the Broken Spur is even farther." His expression softened. "You're safe here, Beatrice. I won't let anyone hurt you." The simple promise, delivered with such quiet certainty, threatened to undo her carefully maintained composure. To hide the sudden sheen of tears, Beatrice turned back to the dishes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Finn dried his hands on a nearby towel, then gently turned her to face him. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her, his voice low and earnest, "about my heart. I know we've just met, and you have no reason to trust any man's words right now. But I'm not William Harrington, and I don't make promises lightly." Before Beatrice could respond, the cookhouse door swung open and Cal Jenkins strode in, his expression shifting from purposeful to surprised when he saw them standing so close together. "Donovan," he said, his tone neutral. "Boss needs you to ride out to the north pasture. Fence needs mending before we move the herd." Finn stepped back from Beatrice, his face resuming its usual calm demeanor. "I'll saddle up right away," he replied, moving toward the door. At the threshold he paused, glancing back at Beatrice. "We'll finish our conversation later, cousin." The way he said "cousin" with a slight emphasis that subtly undermined the fiction they were maintaining did not escape Cal Jenkins' notice. The foreman's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he looked between them. "Miss Warren," he said, touching his hat brim before following Finn out. Left alone in the cookhouse, Beatrice released a shaky breath. Whatever was growing between her and Finn Donovan was dangerous not just because of her past, but because of the precarious position she now held at the Broken Spur. If the Blackwells discovered she wasn't truly Finn's cousin, that their entire introduction was built on a lie. She pushed the thought away and focused on the task at hand. She had bread to bake for the midday meal, beans to set simmering, and the small cabin behind the cookhouse to prepare for her occupation. The future and Finn Donovan's unexpected offer of his heart would have to wait. The autumn days fell into a rhythm at the broken spur. Beatrice rose before dawn each morning to light the cookhouse stove and prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. Midday brought a simpler meal, usually beans, bread, and whatever meat was available. Supper was the main meal of the day, when all the men gathered around the long tables in the cookhouse to enjoy the fruits of Beatrice's labor. She took pride in her work, experimenting with the available ingredients to create meals that went beyond basic sustenance. She pickled late garden vegetables for the winter ahead, baked pies when fruit was available, and learned to make sourdough bread that rivaled any she'd tasted in Boston. The small cabin behind the cookhouse became her sanctuary. With Sarah's help, she transformed the sparse interior into a cozy haven, hanging curtains at the windows and arranging wildflowers in a tin can on the small table. A braided rug beside her narrow bed was a gift from Thomas Blackwell, who'd noticed her shivering in the early morning chill. The ranch hands treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence, particularly after she mastered the art of baking apple pie. Even Cal Jenkins, whose initial suspicion had been evident, seemed to warm to her presence, occasionally bringing her wildflowers or interesting stones he found while riding the range. Only with Finn did Beatrice maintain a careful distance. Their conversation in the cookhouse had left her unsettled, aware of the growing attraction between them yet fearful of its implications. Finn respected her reticence, never pushing for more than she was willing to give, though his eyes often followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. As October gave way to November, the work on the ranch intensified in preparation for winter. The final cattle drive of the season returned, bringing with it a welcome influx of cash and a celebratory mood among the hands. To mark the occasion, Thomas arranged for a dance to be held at the ranch, inviting neighboring ranchers and the families from White Pine. Such gatherings were rare enough to be special, particularly for the isolated ranch hands who had few opportunities to socialize beyond their immediate circle. Sarah insisted that Beatrice attend as a guest rather than working in the kitchen. "You've earned a night of enjoyment," she said firmly, presenting Beatrice with a dress of deep green wool that she had altered to fit. "Besides, every unmarried man in 3 counties will be hoping for a dance with you." Beatrice protested, but secretly she was pleased. The evening of the dance, she took special care with her appearance, washing her hair and arranging it in a simple but elegant style. The green dress, though modest, flattered her figure in a way her everyday dresses did not. When she emerged from her cabin, the sound of fiddle music already drifting from the ranch house where the furniture had been moved aside to create a dance floor, she found Finn waiting for her on the path. He stood perfectly still, his eyes widening slightly as she approached. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, his usual work clothes replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and clean denims. His hair, usually tousled by the wind, was neatly combed and he'd shaved, revealing the strong line of his jaw. "You look beautiful, Beatrice," he said simply, offering his arm. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she accepted it. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." They walked together toward the ranch house, the November night crisp around them. Stars blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, and the distant mountains stood like sentinels against the darkness. "I've been meaning to speak with you," Finn said as they walked, "about our arrangement." Beatrice tensed slightly. "Our arrangement," the cousin's story," he clarified. "It served its purpose getting you settled here, but I'm not comfortable continuing the deception indefinitely. The Blackwells are good people. They deserve the truth." Beatrice stopped, her heart sinking. "You want to tell them everything?" Finn turned to face her, his expression gentle in the moonlight. "Not everything. That's your story to tell or keep, but I think we should admit that we're not related by blood." His voice softened. "And that would free us to explore other possibilities." The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt a flutter of both anticipation and fear. "What if they ask me to leave?" she whispered. "They won't," Finn assured her. "You've proven your worth a dozen times over. Sarah considers you a friend, and Thomas values your contribution to the ranch." He took her hands in his. "But even if they did, you wouldn't be alone. I'd make sure of that." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of several wagons carrying families from White Pine. The moment for private conversation was lost as they were drawn into the festivities. The main room of the ranch house was transformed by lamplight and music. The fiddler, a rancher from a neighboring spread, played lively tunes that had couples spinning across the floor. Tables laden with food and drink lined one wall, including several pies Beatrice had baked that afternoon. Sarah, looking rested and happy with the twins asleep in their cradle in the bedroom, greeted Beatrice with a warm embrace. "You look lovely. That color suits you perfectly." As the evening progressed, Beatrice found herself in demand as a dance partner. She danced with Thomas, with several of the ranch hands, and even with the storekeeper from White Pine, the very man who had shot at her that fateful day. Though he clearly didn't recognize her now through it all, she was acutely aware of Finn's presence. He danced with Sarah, with the wives of neighboring ranchers, with the daughters of White Pine merchants, always graceful despite his usual outdoor work. But his eyes frequently sought hers across the room, and when finally he approached her for a dance, Beatrice felt as though everyone present must surely see the connection between them. As Finn led her onto the floor for a waltz, his hand warm and steady at her waist, Beatrice was conscious of Cal Jenkins watching them with a knowing expression. The foreman had been observant over the past weeks, and she suspected he had long ago seen through their cousin's charade. "Everyone is watching us," she murmured as they moved in perfect rhythm to the music. "Let them watch," Finn replied, his voice low. "I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you, Beatrice." The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through her chest. "And how do you feel?" she asked, suddenly bold. His eyes, bright even in the lamplight, held hers steadily. Like a man who found a treasure he wasn't looking for and isn't fool enough to let it slip away. The music swelled around them, and for a moment, everything else faded: the crowded room, the curious glances, the complicated web of truth and fiction that had brought them together. There was only Finn's arms holding her securely, the rhythm of their steps in perfect harmony, and the growing certainty that what had begun with an act of desperation in a dusty alleyway was blossoming into something far more profound. As the waltz ended, Finn reluctantly released her, though his eyes continued to hold hers. "I need some air," he said quietly. "Would you like to join me on the porch?" Beatrice nodded, allowing him to lead her through the crowd and out into the cool night air. The porch was empty, everyone else drawn to the warmth and music inside. The sounds of the dance were muffled here, allowing for conversation without having to raise their voices. Finn led her to the far end of the porch where a bench sat against the wall. As they settled onto it, Beatrice was keenly aware of his nearness, of the scent of soap and leather that seemed uniquely his. "I meant what I said in there," Finn began, his voice soft in the darkness. "And what I said that first day in White Pine. I know it's fast, perhaps too fast given what you've been through, but I've learned that life doesn't always give you the luxury of time." Beatrice studied his profile in the moonlight. "What happened to you, Finn, before you came to the broken spur?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought perhaps he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound so weighted with memory it made her heart ache. "I was 16 when the war broke out," he said finally. "Too young to enlist properly, but I lied about my age and joined up anyway. Fought for the Union, saw things no boy should see." His voice grew distant. "After Gettysburg, I was assigned to a different unit. Our commander was a man who enjoyed killing a little too much. Under his orders, we did things I'm not proud of." Beatrice remained silent, sensing that Finn needed to tell this story without interruption. "When the war ended, I couldn't go home. Couldn't face my family with the memories I carried. So I drifted west, took work where I could find it. Was a bare-knuckle fighter for a while in Denver." His mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "I was good at it, too good, until one night I nearly killed a man." He turned to look at her directly. "That's when I knew I had to change or become something I couldn't live with. I headed farther west, found work with cattle outfits, learned the trade. When I reached Arizona territory, Thomas Blackwell gave me a chance when others might not have. This place, this ranch, it's where I finally found peace." Beatrice reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "For trusting me with your past." Finn's hand tightened around hers. "Now you understand why I don't want to build anything important on a foundation of lies, not even well-intentioned ones." She nodded slowly. "You're right. We should tell the Blackwells the truth." A shadow of fear crossed her face, or part of it at least. "Only what you're comfortable sharing," Finn agreed. "But soon." A comfortable silence fell between them, their hands still joined on the bench between them. Inside, the music had shifted to a slower, more melancholy tune that drifted through the night air. "Beatrice," Finn said after a moment, his voice hesitant in a way she hadn't heard before. "I know you've had reasons to mistrust men's intentions. And I know that what happened in Boston is still fresh. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to show you that not all men are like William Harrington." The vulnerability in his voice moved her deeply. This was a man who had seen the darkest aspects of human nature, both in war and in peace, yet had found his way back to decency. A man who had offered help to a starving stranger with no expectation of return. A man who now offered his heart with the same straightforward honesty. "Finn," she began, turning toward him on the bench. The porch door swung open, spilling light and music into the night. Thomas Blackwell stepped out, his expression concerned. "Donovan," he called. "Rider coming in fast, looks like trouble." Finn was on his feet instantly, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert. "Coming, boss," he replied, then turned back to Beatrice. "Wait here. I'll be back as soon as I can." She nodded, watching as he followed Thomas down the porch steps and into the yard where a horse and rider were indeed approaching at a gallop. Even from a distance, she could see the rider was slumped forward in the saddle, clinging to the horse's mane. Finn reached the horse just as the rider lost his grip and slid sideways. Finn caught him before he hit the ground, easing him down as Thomas and several others who had heard the commotion rushed to help. Beatrice hurried down the porch steps, her concern overriding Finn's instruction to wait. As she drew closer, she recognized the injured man as Eddie Miller, one of the younger ranch hands who had ridden out that morning to check on a distant section of the range. "Raiders," Eddie was gasping, his face pale with pain and exertion. "Apache. No, not Apache. White men dressed as Apache. Rustlers. Hit the north pasture. Pete's dead. They took 50 head at least." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd as Cal Jenkins pushed forward. "How many?" he demanded. "6, maybe 7, Eddie replied, grimacing as Finn examined a bloody wound in his side. "Didn't get a good look." They came out of nowhere. Shot Pete straight off. Got me when I turned to ride for help. Thomas's expression had hardened into grim resolve. "Cal, get a posse together. Eddie needs the doctor, but we need to go after those cattle before the trail gets cold." "I'll ride to town for Doc Miller," one of the neighboring ranchers volunteered. "And I'll join the posse," another added. As men dispersed to prepare for the pursuit, Finn helped carry Eddie into the house where Sarah and several women immediately began tending to his wound. The festive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by purposeful activity and tense conversations. Finn found Beatrice in the midst of the chaos, his expression grave. "I have to go with them," he said, his voice low. "Cal knows these hills better than anyone, but we need every gun we can muster." Fear clutched at Beatrice's heart. "Be careful," she whispered, acutely aware that their interrupted conversation on the porch might be their last if the rustlers were as dangerous as Eddie's condition suggested. Finn's eyes softened momentarily. "I will." He hesitated, then quickly bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We'll finish our talk when I get back. I promise." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward the bunkhouse to retrieve his rifle and ammunition. Within 20 minutes, a group of 12 men, including Finn, Cal, Thomas, and several neighbors, rode out into the night, following the direction from which Eddie had come. The remaining guests helped restore order to the ranch house, moving furniture back into place and cleaning up the remnants of the interrupted celebration. The women organized themselves into shifts to watch over Eddie, whose wound, though serious, did not appear to be life-threatening once properly cleaned and bandaged. Beatrice found herself unable to rest, her mind filled with worry for Finn and the others. She helped where she could, preparing coffee for those keeping vigil and assisting Sarah with the twins when they awoke crying, disturbed by the unusual activity. As dawn approached with no word from the posse, Beatrice retreated to her cabin, though she knew sleep would elude her. She sat by her window, watching the eastern sky lighten with the first hints of daybreak, praying for Finn's safe return. The sound of horses entering the ranch yard brought her to her feet. Hurrying outside, she joined Sarah and the others who emerged from the main house to meet the returning riders. Relief flooded through her when she saw Finn among them, apparently unharmed. The men looked exhausted, their faces grim as they dismounted. Several of the horses bore makeshift travois, and with a jolt, Beatrice realized they carried bodies. "We caught up with them at Deadman's Canyon," Thomas was explaining to Sarah as Beatrice approached. "Managed to recover most of the cattle, but it was a hard fight." "Pete?" Sarah asked quietly, though they all knew the answer from Eddie's report. Thomas shook his head. "We're bringing him home, and 2 of the rustlers. The rest escaped into the high country. Cal thinks they were Barton's gang from over Prescott Way." As the men dispersed to tend to their horses and the recovered cattle, Finn made his way to Beatrice. His face was etched with fatigue, a smudge of dirt or gunpowder across one cheek, but his eyes lit with warmth when they met hers. "You're all right," she said, the words coming out more as a statement of relief than a question. "I am," he confirmed, his voice rough with exhaustion. "It was close a time or two, but we managed." He glanced toward where some of the men were carefully removing Pete's body from a travois. "Not all of us were so fortunate." Beatrice followed his gaze, sorrow filling her heart for the young ranch hand she had come to know over the past weeks. "I'll prepare breakfast for everyone," she said, knowing that food and coffee would be welcome after the night's ordeal. Finn nodded gratefully. "I need to help with the horses and the cattle we recovered, but after." His voice trailed off, his eyes conveying what words could not. After, Beatrice agreed softly. We'll talk then. The day passed in a blur of activity. A grave was dug for Pete Wilson on a small knoll overlooking the ranch, a place Thomas said the young cowboy had often mentioned as having the best view of the sunset. The two dead rustlers were buried without ceremony some distance away, their identities confirmed by Cal as members of the notorious Barton gang. Eddie Miller's condition improved slightly, though the doctor who arrived from White Pine advised against moving him for at least a week. The recovered cattle were secured in the home pasture, and riders were dispatched to neighboring ranches to warn of possible further raids. Through it all, Beatrice kept busy in the cookhouse, providing meals for the exhausted men and comfort food for those grieving Pete's loss. She saw Finn only in passing, as he was among those Thomas relied on most heavily during the crisis. It wasn't until late afternoon, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, that Finn appeared at the cookhouse door. He had clearly taken time to wash and change his clothes, though weariness still lined his face. "May I walk you home?" he asked simply. Beatrice nodded, removing her apron and checking that the stove was banked for the night. They walked in companionable silence to her cabin, the events of the past 24 hours having created a strange intimacy between them that transcended words. At her door, Finn hesitated. "I should let you rest," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "Would you like to come in?" Beatrice offered, surprising herself with the boldness of the invitation. "Just to talk," she added quickly. "I've been worried about you." Finn nodded, following her into the small cabin. In the confines of the single room, he seemed larger somehow, his presence filling the space in a way that was both intimidating and oddly comforting. "Sit, please." Beatrice gestured to one of the two chairs at her small table. "Would you like some tea?" "It's the least I can offer after what you've been through." "Thank you," Finn said, sinking into the chair with a barely suppressed groan of relief. As Beatrice busied herself with the kettle and teapot, she found her nervousness fading, replaced by a sense of rightness about Finn's presence in her cabin. When she finally joined him at the table, placing a steaming cup before him, the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. "I was scared for you," she admitted, cradling her own cup between her hands, "when I saw the bodies on those travois." "I'm not easy to kill," Finn said with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Though there was a moment in that canyon. He shook his head. "It makes a man think about what's important, about what he might leave unfinished." Beatrice met his gaze across the table, like our conversation on the porch, exactly like that. Finn set down his cup, his expression turning serious. "Beatrice, I know we haven't known each other long. And I know you came here running from a man who wanted to possess you, not love you. I don't want to be another man making demands you're not ready to meet." "What do you want, Finn?" she asked softly. His answer was immediate and unequivocal. "You. A future with you. The chance to build something real together." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "But only if that's what you want too." The warmth of his touch seemed to spread through her entire body. In that moment, with the late afternoon sun streaming through her cabin window and Finn Donovan looking at her with such open longing, Beatrice knew with sudden clarity what she wanted. "When you found me in that alley," she began, turning her hand to clasp his, "I had nothing. No food, no money, no hope. You could have turned me in to the sheriff or walked away or taken advantage of my desperation. Instead, you offered me help with no conditions attached." Her voice strengthened. "You said take what you need and my heart as well." "I wasn't ready then to understand what that meant, but I think I am now." Finn's eyes never left hers, his expression intent. And what does it mean to you, Beatrice? It means you're a man unlike any I've known before. A man who offers without expecting return, who protects without controlling, who really sees me not as a possession or a prize, but as a person of value. She took a deep breath. It means I'm falling in love with you, Finn Donovan, and that terrifies me almost as much as it exhilarates me. The transformation of Finn's face at her words was something Beatrice knew she would remember all her days. Joy and wonder and relief chased across his features, ending in a smile so radiant it seemed to illuminate the entire cabin. "Beatrice," he breathed, rising from his chair and drawing her to her feet. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you looked up at me from that alleyway with defiance in your eyes despite your hunger." His hands framed her face with exquisite gentleness. "May I kiss you now?" "I've been wanting to since that day." In answer, Beatrice rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Finn's lips met hers with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of all that might lie ahead for them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "We still need to tell Thomas and Sarah the truth," he murmured. "About us not being cousins." Beatrice nodded, her heart too full for words. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. From desperation and hunger to love and hope, it was a journey she could never have imagined that October day in White Pine, and it had only just begun. The following morning, Beatrice and Finn requested a private meeting with Thomas and Sarah Blackwell. In the cozy parlor of the main house, with the twins sleeping peacefully nearby, they confessed their deception. "We're not actually cousins," Finn began, his steady gaze meeting Thomas's. "We met the day I brought Beatrice to the ranch. She was in trouble in town and I offered her help in the cook's position here." "I suspected as much," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "Cousins don't look at each other the way you two do." Thomas's expression was more guarded. "Why the lie?" he asked, though his tone held curiosity rather than anger. Beatrice stepped forward, her chin lifted. "The fault is mine, Mr. Blackwell. I was desperate and alone. Finn offered me a chance at honest work, but we feared you might not accept a woman with no references or connections. And now—" Thomas prompted, looking between them. Finn took Beatrice's hand, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "Now we're hoping you'll allow Beatrice to stay on as cook, and that you'll understand that our relationship has changed." A smile slowly spread across Thomas's face. "Donovan, you're the best hand on this ranch, and Miss Warren is the finest cook we've ever had. Your personal arrangements are your own business, so long as they don't interfere with your duties." His expression softened. "And for what it's worth, I think you make a fine match." Relief washed over Beatrice. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I promise my work won't suffer." "Thomas," he corrected gently, and there was never any doubt of that. Sarah rose from her chair, crossing to embrace Beatrice warmly. "I'm happy for you both," she said sincerely. "Though I confess, I've been hoping for this outcome since I first saw you together." As they left the main house, a weight lifted from Beatrice's shoulders. "That went better than I expected," she admitted as they walked toward the cookhouse, where breakfast preparations awaited. Finn squeezed her hand. "The Blackwells are good people. They value honesty, but they also understand that life isn't always straightforward." Over the weeks that followed, Beatrice and Finn's courtship blossomed openly. They took meals together when their duties allowed, rode out to picnic by a mountain stream on Beatrice's day off, and spent evenings on the porch of her cabin, talking of their pasts and their hopes for the future. December brought colder weather and preparations for Christmas. Beatrice threw herself into planning a feast for the ranch hands who would remain over the holiday. many of whom had no families to return to. She baked cookies and pies, dried fruits for decorations, and even persuaded Thomas to have a pine tree brought down from the mountains to stand in the main house. On Christmas Eve, after the celebrations had wound down and most of the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Finn walked Beatrice back to her cabin through a light dusting of snow, a rarity in that part of Arizona, and considered by all to be a good omen. "I have something for you," he said as they reached her door, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "It isn't much, but—" Beatrice unwrapped the brown paper carefully to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wild rose. "Finn, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate details. "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things I kept when I left home. I've carried it with me all these years, thinking someday I might have someone special to give it to." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I'd like that someone to be you, Beatrice." Tears pricked at her eyes as she recognized the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always," she promised, pinning it carefully to her shawl. "I have something for you as well, though it can't compare to this." Inside the cabin, she retrieved a package from her trunk. Finn unwrapped it to find a hand-knitted scarf in shades of blue that matched his eyes. "Sarah taught me to knit," Beatrice explained, suddenly shy. "It's my first attempt, so it isn't perfect, but it's perfect because you made it," Finn interrupted gently, immediately wrapping the scarf around his neck. "Thank you." As he gazed down at her, snowflakes catching in her hair and the silver brooch gleaming at her shoulder, Finn seemed to come to a decision. Taking both her hands in his, he dropped to one knee on the cabin floor. "Beatrice Warren," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you came west to escape a man who tried to force you into marriage. So I understand if this is too soon or if you need more time. But I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" The simplicity of the proposal, delivered without grand gestures or flowery words, touched Beatrice deeply. This was Finn, honest, direct, and respectful of her past even as he hoped for their future. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Finn Donovan." His face lit with joy as he rose and gathered her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of all they hoped to be together. When they finally parted, Finn said with a hint of his usual practicality, "We should wait until spring for the wedding. Give you time to be certain, and us time to prepare." Beatrice nodded, though in her heart she harbored no doubts. Spring would be perfect, perhaps when the wildflowers bloom in the valley. Winter passed in a haze of happiness for Beatrice. The ranch settled into its cold weather routines, mending tack, repairing buildings, and ensuring the cattle had access to feed despite the occasional snowfall. Eddie Miller recovered fully from his wound, though he carried a new seriousness that hadn't been there before Pete's death. Beatrice continued her duties as cook, but now she and Finn openly shared meals and time together. In the evenings, they would sit by her cabin stove, planning their future. Finn had been saving his wages for years, and with Thomas's blessing, he had his eye on a small parcel of broken spur land that could be split off for their own homestead. "Nothing grand," he told Beatrice as they pored over a rough map he had drawn, "but good grazing land with a year-round creek. We could build a house here on this rise. Start with a few head of cattle and some horses, maybe even plant an orchard like the one you've mentioned from your childhood." Beatrice, who had once lived in a fine Boston house with servants and social position, found she wanted nothing more than this simple dream Finn described. A home of their own, work they could be proud of, and perhaps someday, children to fill that home with laughter. As March yielded to April and the desert began to bloom, wedding preparations commenced in earnest. Sarah helped Beatrice sew a wedding dress of ivory muslin with lace trim ordered specially from Tucson. Thomas offered the use of the main house for the ceremony and celebration afterward. The ranch hands, under Cal Jenkins' somewhat bemused direction, constructed a bower of juniper branches and early wildflowers where the vows would be spoken. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the desert in full spring glory. Neighbors from miles around gathered at the broken spur, along with the townspeople of White Pine who had come to know and respect both Finn and Beatrice. In the small bedroom she had first occupied upon arriving at the ranch, Sarah helped Beatrice dress for her wedding. The ivory gown was simple but elegant, its lines flattering to Beatrice's slender figure. Her hair was arranged in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with tiny white flowers Sarah had gathered that morning. "Something borrowed," Sarah said, fastening a pearl necklace around Beatrice's throat. "These were my grandmother's." "And something old." Beatrice touched the silver wild rose brooch pinned near her heart, Finn's Christmas gift and her most treasured possession. There was a knock at the door, and Thomas entered, looking uncharacteristically formal in his best suit. "It's time," he said softly, offering his arm. "If you'll allow me the honor of giving you away, Miss Warren." Tears threatened to spill from Beatrice's eyes. "I would be proud to have you do so, Thomas." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Standing beneath the flower-decked bower with Reverend Simmons from White Pine officiating, Beatrice and Finn exchanged vows they had written themselves. Finn promised to cherish and protect her, to be her partner in all things, and to remember always the blessing that had brought her into his life. Beatrice vowed to stand beside him through all life's challenges, to create a home filled with love, and to never forget the kindness he had shown a hungry stranger. When Reverend Simmons pronounced them man and wife, and Finn kissed her with tender reverence before their assembled friends, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness and belonging she had never known before. The celebration that followed was joyous and uninhibited. Tables groaned with food, much of it prepared by Beatrice in the days leading up to the wedding. A fiddler played lively tunes that had everyone dancing, including the newly married couple who moved together with the same natural harmony that characterized their relationship. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the ranch yard, Thomas called for attention. When the crowd quieted, he raised his glass. "To Finn and Beatrice Donovan," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "May your lives together be as bright as this day, and may you find in each other the peace and happiness you both deserve." A chorus of cheers and well wishes followed as everyone drank to the toast. Finn's arm tightened around Beatrice's waist, and when she looked up at him, she saw in his eyes all the love and promise she felt in her own heart. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the ranch had settled into silence, Finn carried Beatrice across the threshold of their temporary home, a larger cabin Thomas had insisted they use until their own homestead was built. Finn had spent weeks preparing it, making it comfortable and private for their first days as husband and wife. As he set her gently on her feet, Beatrice looked around at the cozy space, the bed with its handmade quilt, the vases of wildflowers on every surface, the small table set with 2 places for breakfast, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. "Happy, Mrs. Donovan?" Finn asked softly, his hand still resting lightly on her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully, reaching up to touch his face. "And grateful, Finn. So grateful that you found me that day, that you offered not just food to a starving woman but a chance at a new life." His eyes darkened with emotion. "It was the best decision I ever made," he murmured, drawing her closer, "and one I intend to honor every day of our lives together." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and passion, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the hunger that had driven her to steal that loaf of bread had been satisfied in ways she could never have imagined. Physical hunger had led her to White Pine, but it was the hunger for love, for belonging, for a place to call home that had truly been fulfilled. In Finn's arms, with the promise of their future stretching before them like the wide Arizona sky, Beatrice Warren Donovan had found everything she never knew she was searching for. In the years that followed, Finn and Beatrice's love story became something of a legend in White Pine and the surrounding ranches. Their homestead, which they named Wildrose after the silver brooch Beatrice always wore, flourished under their care. The small herd of cattle Finn started with grew steadily, and the orchard Beatrice planted yielded its first fruit 3 years after their wedding. Their happiness was complete when, in the spring of 1886, their son James Thomas Donovan was born, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth. The children grew strong and healthy in the clear Arizona air, riding almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. Beatrice never did return to Boston, though occasionally she received news through carefully anonymous channels that William Harrington had eventually married a banker's daughter and seemed to have forgotten his pursuit of Beatrice Warren. The land that had once been so important to him had been purchased by a mining company who discovered, to their dismay, that the rumored silver deposits were far smaller than anticipated. On the 10th anniversary of the day Finn found Beatrice stealing bread in White Pine, they hosted a gathering at Wildrose for their friends and neighbors. The Blackwells came with their twins, now strapping boys of 11. Cal Jenkins, still foreman at the Broken Spur but now with a wife of his own, brought a hand-carved cradle for the baby Beatrice was expecting in the fall. As twilight settled over the gathering and lanterns were lit around the yard of the home Finn had built with his own hands, he drew Beatrice away from their guests for a moment of privacy on the porch. 10 years, he said softly, his arm around her waist, his free hand resting gently on the swell of their coming child. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." Beatrice leaned into his embrace, still marveling at the journey that had brought them here. "From theft to love to this," she murmured. "Who would have thought it possible?" Finn kissed her temple, his touch as tender now as it had been on their wedding day. "I knew it the moment I saw you," he said. "Even hungry and desperate, there was something in your eyes that called to me. Something that said you were worth everything I could offer and more." From inside the house came the sound of their children's laughter, mingling with that of their friends. The life they had built together surrounded them, the sturdy house, the thriving ranch, the family they had created. "Take what you need and my heart as well," Beatrice quoted softly, turning in his arms to face him. "Your words that first day. Did you know then what they would lead to?" Finn smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening, lines earned through years of Arizona sun and genuine happiness. "I hoped," he admitted. "But this," he gestured to encompass their home, their life, the evidence of their love all around them. "This is beyond even my most hopeful dreams." As their lips met in a kiss that still held the wonder of their first embrace, Beatrice knew that what had begun as an act of desperate hunger had blossomed into the richest harvest two hearts could reap. And as the baby within her stirred, a tangible reminder of their enduring love, she silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led her to White Pine, Arizona, and into the arms of the cowboy who had offered not just bread to a starving woman, but his heart as well. The story of the Wildrose Ranch and the love that built it would be told for generations to come, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the unexpected ways in which two people might find their way home to each other.